Welcome to Random Movie Reviews. I'm Nathan, and today I'll be ranking all 6 of the Scream movies. Well, since Spooktober is right around the corner, our favorite month for watching our favorite creepy, spooky, scary movies, I decided to pregame a month early with one of my favorite horror movie franchises of all time, the Scream films. Scream has been going strong since 1996, and with the release of Scream 6 just last year, there is no sign of slowing down. I know they ran into some hiccups with the upcoming Scream 7 movie with Melissa Barrera being let go from that film, and Jenna Ortega saying that she's not going to be returning either. But it was announced that Neve Campbell, aka the best final girl ever, Sidney Prescott, will in fact be returning for the 7th film, with Kevin Williamson, who is the screenplay writer for Screams 1, 2, and 4. He's the one that kind of came up with this idea in the first place. He's going to be directing the 7th movie for the first time ever. So I'm very curious to see how that's going to turn out. Overall, the Scream franchise as a whole is easily one of the most consistent, long-running horror franchises of all time. In fact, one could argue that the Scream franchise is probably the greatest horror movie franchise, just in terms of consistency and quality and just overall great entertainment value. I don't love all the movies in the franchise, as you'll hear me talk about when we get started with the list, but I enjoy the vast majority of these movies quite a bit. I just find them to be just super entertaining, having a good mixture of humor and horror and suspense and mystery thriller. There's a lot of, there's a whole whodunit aspect to all these movies that are fun, even if certain entries are more obvious with their red herrings than others. Regardless, all of these movies, with maybe the very last entry on this list, which I'll get into, all of these movies has something to offer in terms of entertainment value. They're all a great bit of fun, and so, I definitely have some opinions and maybe even some hot takes on this franchise. So, with all that being said, let's get into it. So, starting in last place with number 6, I'm going to be going from worst to best here, is Scream 3. This is kind of seen by most fans of the franchise as the weakest entry in the series. It's not very good. That every time I return to it, it becomes less and less enjoyable. There's so many things about this movie that's so stupid. And the film was unfortunately messed around with due to a lot of very early internet leaks revealing of who the Ghostface was. And I think the first Scream 2 and Scream 3 were both had issues with that because it was the pre-internet era. And so Kevin Williamson, Wes Craven, and the other writers, they all had to kind of retcon a lot of stuff in order to try to, make a twist that audiences didn't see coming because it was leaked prior. It's unfortunate, but regardless, Scream 3, it has one of the worst Ghostface ever. His motivation completely undermines the motivation of the first movie, which is something I hate when any sequel does that, where it's like, oh, here's a secret piece of information that you never knew about just for the sake of creating some half-ass motivation. I really hate that. The voice changing thing is stupid. Sydney seeing the ghost of her mother is really dumb, and it's by far the least scariest and most tame Scream movie in terms of horror and violence. There's little to no suspense or tension in this movie. The humor falls flat like 90% of the time, which is really unfortunate because most movies in this franchise have a good balance of both. And yeah, it's easily the worst Scream movie. It's not the worst movie ever. It's still somewhat entertaining. And, there are certainly worse slasher sequels out there than Scream 3. But as far as this franchise goes, last place, Scream 3. Coming in at number 5 is Scream 5, or Scream 2022. I went into this movie very skeptical. And unfortunately, I ended up being kind of correct with my feelings on the movie when I saw the trailer. I was like, I don't really know about this. The movie is definitely a huge step up from Scream 3 in terms of quality. There's a lot more great suspense scenes. There's some brutal Ghostface moments, which are fun. The movie really falters with me in terms of, its meta commentary, what the movie's commenting on in terms of horror sequels, reboots, and never-ending franchises and stuff like that. There's another entry in this list, which we'll get into later because it's one of my favorites, that talks about all of those things and is executed much more effectively than they are in this movie. And so this movie doesn't really have anything that much new to say in terms of adding to the meta commentary, in my opinion. And then there's the ghost faces, which I absolutely hate the ghost faces in this movie. I hate their motivation based around toxic fandom. I'm going to tell you right now, that's going to be one of the main reasons why Scream 5 is not going to age well in the future, because we're now living in an era where the term toxic fandom is being used by creators, directors, actors, producers, what have you. They're using that term as a way to deflect legitimate criticism. Look no further than the current Star Wars controversy going on with the Acolyte. The people behind that show keep blaming the audiences for being racist for not liking that show, when in actuality, you look at most reviews for that show, it's because it's not a very good show. I haven't seen it personally, so I can't speak on that. But regardless, the whole toxic fandom motivation behind this movie is really stupid and lame. And I don't like the ghost faces. And most of the new characters, I think Melissa Barrera and Jenna Ortega are very good in it. The other characters that are introduced in this movie, they don't really get a whole lot to do, but that's something that gets fixed in the next entry on my list. And then the use of the legacy characters in Scream 5. I don't like the way their characters are kind of put to the side on this movie, and they're very underutilized, and it just wasn't really satisfying to see this iconic trio that really has carried the vast majority of this franchise to be just thrown to the sideline like that and just being really underutilized. And yeah, I wasn't a big fan of Scream 5. I thought it was underwhelming. I didn't like how the movie was, most of the scenes in the movie were kind of just a lazy rehash of the first film. And I know the movie's trying to comment on legacy sequels in general, but that doesn't make the movie any more clever when it also indulges in the exact same cliches as other legacy sequels, because all that Scream 5 did for me when I watched it was remind me of just how much better the first movie is. And no sequel should really do that. It should try to strive to be its own thing and create its own memorable moments. So yeah, that's why Scream 5 is second to last on this list. And then at number 4, I should probably say from here on out, these are my favorite Scream movies by far. These are the cream of the crop, the best that this franchise has to offer, in my opinion. And at number 4, we have Scream 6. Scream 6 was a very pleasant surprise for me, because I didn't like Scream 5, and I went into it just as skeptical, just as I did with the 5th entry of the series, but I was pleasantly surprised, and a lot of the gripes that I had for Scream 5 were kind of corrected in Scream 6. I think all of the characters that were introduced in Scream 5, they work a lot better in this movie. I like how this movie is more character-driven in general, and it kind of tones down some of the more forced meta aspects of the previous entry, which I think is to the movie's benefit. The movie does a ton of different stuff, messing around with the Scream formula. We have an interesting twist on the Scream opening, which is fantastic. We have set pieces that we've never seen in a Scream series before, like that apartment set piece is fantastic with the ladder sequence. One of the best Ghostface moments ever. In fact, this movie has a lot of my favorite Ghostface moments. It's easily the most brutal of all the Scream movies in terms of violence, but it also has a lot of humor and just a good energy felt all the way throughout. I think the pacing of this movie is really, really great. Very much enjoyed all of that. I wasn't a fan of them bringing back the ghost of Billy Loomis. They did that in Scream 5. I thought it was dumb in Scream 5. I think it's equally as dumb in this movie, although they don't do it as much as in Scream 5, so that's a plus. But overall, yeah, Scream 6 is just, it's a fun time. It shows that you can do this series without focusing on characters in the past. And I like the way that it took risks with the Scream formula. A lot of that really worked for me. The ghost faces in Scream 6 aren't great. Their motivation's also pretty half-assed and dumb. But all of the great ghost face sequences in the movie leading up to that kind of makes up for that for me. So that's not a deal breaker. So yeah, overall, Scream 6, very solid, good time. Was pleasantly surprised when I saw it, and I just rewatched it recently for this list, and it's still a lot of fun. Not perfect, but all around, I enjoy Scream 6 quite a bit. All right, getting into the top three, we have Scream 2. Scream 2 is great. It's just, it kind of takes all the stuff that you love from the first Scream movie, and it gives you all kind of the classic sequel stuff that you would expect. It's not as great as the first Scream movie, but it has a lot of the great elements of that movie. You know, you got Wes Craven's awesome direction, you got great Ghostface stuff, you got a fun opening that is very different from the first movie. You got Sydney, Dewey, and Gale once again being the trio that holds this series together, and they're all fantastic. And it's just it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of great set pieces in it. I love the final act with the stage and the drama set that Sydney has to fight on. That's really great. Yeah, there's not a whole lot to say about Scream 2. It's just a super solid horror sequel that has a lot of meta commentary on sequels in general that land just as well as the meta commentary in the first Scream movie. So yeah, all around Scream 2. I mean, it's just it's a fun time. As far as the ghost faces go, they're okay. They're not amazing, and the motivation isn't great either. I mean, there's only one sequel, in my opinion, which we'll get into in the next entry on this list, that I think has a great motivation and a great Ghostface reveal. But overall, Scream 2 is just solid fun, and I have a good time every time I revisit it, and that's why it ranks so highly on this list. At number 2, we have Scream 4. Now, Scream 4 is somewhat of a divisive entry amongst Scream fans in the series, although I will say in recent years it's been kind of getting a cult following. And very deservedly so, in my opinion. I think Scream 4 is a terrific commentary on internet fame and obsession, and really ahead of its time when you think about it. This movie came out in 2011, so Instagram wasn't a thing, and Twitter and Facebook was just starting to become more mainstream, more prevalent in our society. And the way this movie kind of foreshadows teenagers wanting to live stream all the time, wanting to try to get famous because of doing crazy stuff and uploading it on the internet. There's something about the motivation behind the ghost faces in Scream 4 that feel oddly plausible to me, and that's one of the reasons why I think it's one of the better motivations in this entire series. The ghost faces in this, specifically that of Jill, played by Emma Roberts, is easily the second best ghost face in this series, in my opinion. I think she's awesome, and like I said, that motivation predicting what crazy people would do to get famous via the internet, like I said, it feels oddly plausible to me. And so I just think that this movie has aged the best out of all the Scream sequels because of that. And on top of that, the way this movie uses its legacy characters, which, by the way, Scream 4 is technically a legacy sequel, and it's a way better legacy sequel than the fifth movie, in my opinion. I love the way that they're utilizing this movie. I love their chemistry with one another. There's so many great sequences and scenes, and the movie has the best balance of suspense and horror since the original Scream movie, of suspense and comedy and horror. It just has all of those attributes, and it has the best balance of all that. I will say, one of the downsides of Scream 4 is how the movie looks, and everybody's talked about this at this point, but it's hard to ignore. There's a weird blur effect or some sort of color grading issue on as far as like the cinematography in this movie is concerned. It's really noticeable anytime there's like lights in the scene, whether it's like car headlights or somebody's walking by a lamp, and you see it's like super blurry and kind of like there's a weird gloss on this movie that is visually ugly, and I don't like it. And then the other flaw I have with this movie is I don't like the opening. I think the opening's a bit redundant and kind of eye-rolling a little bit. It doesn't ruin the movie for me because all the other stuff leading up to that is great. I like the new characters in Scream 4 too. Kirby being a great one, which we see again in Scream 6. Kirby's a huge standout. So I like the new characters that they introduced in Scream 4 a bit. But yeah, Scream 4, very underrated, super entertaining entry in the series. And it's one that's grown on me every time I've revisited it. Yeah, Scream 4 is awesome. Just an underrated horror movie in general, let alone being an underrated Scream sequel. It's definitely my favorite of all the sequels, hands down. Last but certainly not least, we have the one that started it all, Scream. Scream is not only one of the best slasher movies, not only one of the best 90s movies, 90s horror movies in general. It's one of my favorite horror movies of all time. It's one of the movies that got me into horror. I think it's one of the best gateway horror movies of all time because the movie is scary. I mean, the opening of this movie alone, in my opinion, is one of the best horror movie openings, as well as probably the scariest scene in any of the Scream movies. It's just so fucking suspenseful and violent and shocking. And the first time you see it, it really leaves an impact. It's brilliant. And Drew Barrymore, her acting in that, you know, it's such a brief scene in comparison to the rest of the movie, but it's hands down the most memorable aspect of the movie, in my opinion, and it's still brilliant. And it's the scariest thing in all the Scream movies. There's not another Scream movie that has topped that scene in terms of just tension. It's still brilliant. The movie was pretty ahead of its time in terms of its meta commentary on other slasher movies, and Scream very rightfully gets recognized as being a film that kind of revitalized the horror genre because it was in a pretty low period when we got into the 90s. Slashers were becoming pretty much a parody of themselves, and so because Scream was self-aware and it brought a new energy to the genre that we hadn't seen in a long time, it became a very big and awesome hit. And it's one that is now seen as a total classic. I mean, most horror fans that I'm aware of absolutely love Scream, as do I. Cast is fantastic. I mean, this is where we get established our core three characters with Sidney, Dewey, and Gale. Billy Loomis and Stu as the ghost faces are still the best of all the series. I know I love Jill a lot, but they're still the best. That whole reveal, the first time you see it, it's pretty like, whoa, it's a pretty mind-blowing twist that everybody knows about now, but it's still super fun to watch. And like I said, this is a great movie to get people into horror movies because it is scary, but it also has humor. It has some lighter moments. It has some great suspense moments. It gives you a little bit of everything, and I think it's a great way to introduce somebody to the horror genre, specifically the slasher genre, because I don't think you have to be super aware of slashers to get enjoyment out of Scream. There's so many of the tropes in those movies are well known in pop culture that most people are aware of them, even if they haven't seen a lot of those movies. And it is still just as fun and awesome to watch now as it was back in 1996, and it's still stands as being one of the greatest horror movies ever, especially one of the best slasher movies of all time, in my opinion. So yeah, guys, that's my ranking of the Scream movies. Tell me what you think about these movies. What's your rankings? Put them in the list below. And as always, thank you guys for watching.